Okay, welcome back to the AecHive Podcast. I'm Ralph Montague. I'm a director at ArcDocs and one of the co-founders of AecHive, where we're talking about innovation in architecture, engineering, and construction. I'm joined by my fellow co-founder, John Egan. John, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everyone. John Egan, the CEO at BIM Launcher and co-founder at AecHive, and I'm looking forward to another great conversation today.
We're really excited to be joined today by Charlie Portelli from Thornton Tomasetti. Charlie is a computational designer and senior associate application developer. He's also an adjunct professor at CASE at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which stands for the Center of Architectural Science and Ecology. Charlie, you're very welcome. Look forward to speaking to you. Do you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself and your company?
Cool. Thank you, gentlemen. So my name's Charlie Portelli. A little bit about myself. Born and raised New Yorker. I work at Thornton Tomasetti. I'm part of their core studio, which is kind of their computational and research arm for the company. And we get to work with all the different practices within TT. So many folks know TT as a structural engineering firm, but there's actually 10 different practices within Thornton Tomasetti, structures only being one of them. There's facades, sustainability, renewal, applied sciences, so on and so forth. So we are kind of like sort of centrally located conceptually, that we get to work with each of these different practices and kind of build applications and workflows for them specifically.
Very good. I mean, that's quite unusual for an AEC company to have a whole division, if you like, that's dedicated to R&D development. I mean, I think one of the reasons we started AecHive was to kind of highlight the importance of innovation and R&D for the AEC sector, because our general feeling was that not a lot of formal research and development was taking place. So what brought, do you think, TT to that point that they think, well, that we should set up a whole division?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's kind of
R&D.
Yeah, I think it's something that's happened. It's been through a series of evolutions, right? Before the group was formalized, there was kind of this small little division that was called, I think it was like automation or something like that. And it was run by this one guy, Gregor Wilkner. He's no longer at TT, but he would basically automate a bunch of stuff using CATIA and Excel and so on. And then, you start kind of fast forwarding, and that was before the days of Grasshopper or anything like that. You start fast forwarding, CATIA was starting to get some prevalence in the industry, and you obviously use that, strictly on projects because you want, it's expensive and you need to be able to pay for it, right? So you use it in projects. And then you start to, Grasshopper came around, and there was always like scripting and coding, and whether it was VB and, in CATIA or, accessing the DLLs via C# or something like that. So you start to build efficiencies on projects, right? So the proof is kind of in the pudding. It's very immediate. You spend 2 hours, writing a quick little subroutine that then automates a bunch of stuff, and you use that throughout the course of that project repeatedly, right? So there's direct feedback and tangibility of like why this is like a good thing to do. And then, ambitions grow over time, and talent and staffing and projects and complexities, they all slowly start to grow over time. The firm starts to realize like, oh, we could do that now because now we have this capabilities, and their imaginations start to wander, and they start to say, well, can we do, this, and can we tackle it this way, and can we tackle it that way? And kind of the creative process kicks in, and everyone starts pitching in ideas, and the wish list grows a lot faster than you can actually execute it. So then you need to hire more staff, and kind of pockets you need to fill in. Well, we need somebody to do web development. We need someone to do backend stuff. We need someone to do database stuff, and it slowly starts to kind of grow itself. I think it formalized itself roughly 2011, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it was called the AMC, like Advanced Modeling, AMG, Advanced Modeling Group. And then it kind of rebranded itself as Core Studio several years after that.
But TT have obviously got to the point now where R&D has value. Like they see the value in having that division. And how would you encourage other AEC companies to understand the value of R&D?
Well, I think the first thing is to don't think of, for some reason I always think of R&D has a negative connotation in our industry as compared to like, the medical industry or something like that.
Yeah, so it's like a waste of money or a waste of time.
Exactly, right?
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like the medical industry, R&D is like they are going to save lives at some point in time, and to find the cure for cancer, it's not like a 2-year endeavor, right? It's going to be like a multi-year thing, right? But for architecture and engineering and construction, the projects are considerably shorter when you're thinking it in comparison to like the cure for cancer or the cure for leukemia or something like that. So from my perspective, the way I like to think of it is I like to think of it as applied R&D. So you are doing things directly on projects. You are solving solutions, day-to-day solutions on projects to help that project move along more efficiently, right? And then you build this over time, right? So you start off, you don't try to boil the ocean, right? That's like the first kind of pitfall that many kind of young guns coming out of college do. Like, oh, I could do this amazing stuff, whatever. But you never really worked on a project, so don't try to boil the ocean. Try to do this one little thing, right? And see the value in that, and then share that with your project team, and grow their experience and their knowledge level. And now they can do what you were doing, and that frees you up to do the next level. And you do the next level, and then you share that with your project team, and they grow their knowledge level and experience level, and then so on and so forth, right? So you kind of keep building and spreading this throughout the company. Right?
And I suppose one of the challenges, particularly in AEC, because it's so project focused and the budgets are sort of tied to the project, if you like, it's quite difficult to do R&D, which is maybe, it might help one project, but I presume the best R&D is the one that's going to help a few projects or even become something that you use over and over again.
Exactly.
And it's channeling some of that project budget and time to R&D work. Is probably one of the challenges that a lot of architectural engineering and even contracting companies probably find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one way I describe it is I kind of put this analogy together a few years ago. Many years ago, before I got into this kind of highly digital space, I worked for an interiors company for a hot second, and they basically had a library of details that they would use for various projects. And then sometimes they would take those details and modify them, right? Improve upon them based on new materials or new looks or whatever, right? So my analogy is that at some point in time, someone spent their time to draw this detail for a specific project, right? And then they cataloged it, right? So they billed that time to that project. And then the next project came along and they used that same detail and modified it a little bit. So they might have taken, let's say, 10 hours to draw the first detail. And then the second time they used it, they may have only taken, 2 hours to do the modification and tweaking, whatever, and so on and so forth. So writing these little kind of subroutines and these little applications and whatever, right, you can kind of build them over time and make them project agnostic in a way over time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So R&D to me, I see it the same way as that person that was drawing that CAD detail for, the bar top, connection or something like that.
Yeah. Excellent. And obviously, when you do R&D work, I mean, there's going to be times where you do go down a road and it doesn't work out, so there's going to be some failures, if you like, and there's going to be some wins. What are some of the big wins that TNT have come across, and do you have any advice for the listeners on how to avoid some of the failures? Or maybe you don't want to avoid maybe failures are good as well.
Yeah, I think micro failures are good. Spending a couple hours working on something and it doesn't work, it hones you in on the solution, right? And again, it's no different than that person drafting that detail. They do the first iteration, it doesn't work, and then they have to do a second iteration, third iteration, right? So these micro failures are acceptable. I think macro failures, that would help you avoid macro failures. I think macro failures can be catastrophic. I think, I'm going to use a phrase again, like don't try to boil the ocean, right? Keep it simple. Try to do this one little thing, make it work. Once you got that foolproof, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one, right? And then you'll start to see a series of little wins over time, right? And then it becomes a big win when you're able to kind of package it all together and get like this whole ecosystem set up. So I think that's kind of my advice, is like fail small, but aim for success.
Do you think this type of R&D innovation work that TNT are doing is reserved only for large organizations like Thornton Tomasetti, or if you were a small or medium-sized business, you might be listening to this. Well, obviously those guys have got the budgets and time to do that. We don't have the budgets. How would you encourage, I suppose, the SMEs? Because within the construction sector, a large portion of the sector, at least 90% of the sector, is SMEs rather than big organizations. Mm-hmm. So there's two questions there. One is R&D reserved for large or well-resourced organizations, and what encouragement could you give to SMEs?
Yeah, I think the answer to the first question is R&D reserved only for large firms? I'm going to say no. And whether I'm stubborn or optimistic, I think my answer to that one is no. I think anyone can do it. With regards to budget, there's a couple of topics there. I think when you're a small firm, you can easily take some portion of your day, whether it's at the end of the day or throughout your lunch break or something, right? A portion of your day that it doesn't affect your billable hours, and try to learn one little thing. Remember back in the days when I was in architecture and we had our little group there, we would jokingly say, like, your goal is to learn one new thing a day. And it was kind of a joke, but we kind of took it, more playfully. And we did learn new things regularly. So as a small firm, take some portion of your time and learn one little thing. It may not be something that you apply immediately, but over the course of several days, you may learn a few things that compound, and then you can apply it towards something, and it doesn't affect your project budget or anything like that. And I think small firms have a huge benefit compared to big firms in the fact that because they're a smaller firm, I think there was a statistic that like 70 to 80% of architecture firms are 10 people or less. When you're that small of a company, you can easily get everyone together for lunch and share that one little thing that you've learned with everyone else, right? And help build, the knowledge base around that firm. When you're a firm of, 700, 800, 1,000, 1,500 people, right? Sharing that knowledge becomes another task, right? So learning it and then disseminating it are two separate things, but they need to go hand in hand in order to actually make it successful within the firm.
Yeah. Maybe you can come in, John. You're a small, medium enterprise.
I come from a different perspective altogether. I mean, when I was doing my undergrad, I was, I got really interested in computational design, and BIM, and I really started to spend all of my time in generative design and understanding, trying to teach myself around that. And I suppose it's set me up for the last, let's say, 10 years of learning. But I mean, I learn stuff every day, but that isn't enough to make, and what I have to say is that, or rather my question would be, is that Thornton Tomasetti core has, it wouldn't exist if it wasn't commercially viable. So how do you think you'd actually advise users or listeners that are learning every day? They're trying to learn every day, whether they're, at the beginning where they have, let's say, a year, 2 years to go until they get actually proficient and productive with scripting, etc., to really make, some part of, to really give them that direct feedback and measurement of value loop that you spoke about earlier, so that they can actually see the value in their work. How do you get from, I suppose, or how would you advise listeners that are learning every day, becoming proficient with their skills, but need to make that jump into making it commercially feasible, so that they actually can afford to keep learning every day, rather than just have that hour at the end of every day, which, if you're anything like me, turns into 3 or 4, and people around you asking you what the hell you're doing it for.
Yeah, no, and I think you kind of got to the next level of what I was hinting at, is that, yeah, you start off with a little bit during your lunch break, an hour after your work day, and slowly you become engulfed by it, and it starts to take over more and more of your time. I remember I would set aside an hour every evening, starting at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. to do something, and then next thing I know, within a couple of weeks, I was up to midnight because I was so engulfed in it. But the thing that I was doing became so mature that I can now shift that time, and instead of starting at 7 p.m. till midnight, I can kind of shift it earlier, because now this became actual work, and it became something that we were using on projects, right? So it's no longer this kind of fun and games sort of thing. It matures over time, right? I think what's useful is keeping it simple. What you're trying to do, keep it extremely simple. I think architects have a way of making things complex for no reason whatsoever. It'd be great if it could do this, and it could do that, and could do this, and could do that. And next thing you know, you have all these bells and whistles for the very unique edge cases, right? In the meantime, you could have spent 20% of your time to execute 80% of the work. In the meantime, you spent 80% of your time to do just 20% of the work, right? So focus on the meat of it, and don't focus on edge cases. Don't focus on very unique cases. Try to be very generalized in what you're doing. Focus on the problem that you have at hand, and don't focus on hypothetical problems that you may run into in the future, because they're so hypothetical you may not even run into them. Right?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at CASE, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. What is it you're teaching future architects, or are you working with architects? Or
yeah. So I've been teaching at CASE this is my 3rd semester now, and the students are a broad cross-section. There's some undergrad students, there's some graduate students, and then there are also some PhD students kind of taking the class. And then we also have this semester a few, I guess you can call them post-professionals, taking the class as well, to try to, hone in on their skills. As you kind of mentioned, another way of, trying to instead of spending an hour every day, is like maybe you just sign up for a class, right? That's another opportunity. So there's a broad stroke of folks in the class. The class that I teach is called Environmental Parametrics. And at a broad level, there's kind of like 3 topics that we cover. There's parametric modeling, optimization, and then daylighting. And the goal is to understand how to build parametric models, run them through an optimization process, understanding goals and understanding fitness functions, and then use the daylight simulations as part of that optimization cycle. So at the end of the semester, they end up designing. I like to focus on facade systems just because I have a soft spot for facades. Some sort of facade system that is optimized for specific daylighting conditions and programmatic conditions and so on.
The ultimate aim of producing better buildings, basically.
Exactly.
And understanding how those buildings are going to perform. So
exactly.
You're not doing a sort of a retrospective adjustment to buildings.
There's many presentations that you see of like buildings with atriums and arrows and airflow and all this other stuff. And then you run a CFD simulation and you realize that that's not really the case, right? So exactly what you said, this is not trying to do like a post-rationalization. It's trying to do this, you're rationalizing it as you're designing it, right?
I mean, we've never met in person, but we probably sat in the same room. So I attended a smart geometry conference. It was 2012 at Rensselaer Polytechnic University, and those are fascinating. And it's one of the things John and I have been discussing about what's the best sort of innovation model. So we looked at smart geometry, which is quite a formal week-long workshops, quite academic. We've looked at the sort of hackathon model, which is less formal, shorter, weekend type workshop projects. What do you feel is the best way to generate real innovation? So rather than just people coming together having a bit of fun, but that innovation never goes anywhere. So
yes, we were both at the RPI Smart Geometry event back. That was like 2012, I think.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Yeah. So I've been to AAG, I've been to Acadia, I've been to Smart Geometry, I've been to it was called the Revit RTC Revit Technology Conference. Now it's called Built, and I've been to that as well. I've been to their Data Day. They have a thing called Data Day the day before the conference. I've been to I think I mentioned it, Autodesk University, and whatever. And I think the one I've been to AEC Hackathon, I've been to AEC Tech, the one that TT hosts. And I think the 2 that resonate with me are the original format of Smart Geometry, and I'll talk about why I said original format. And the other one that resonates with me is the AEC Tech event that Thornton Tomasetti hosts. The reason being is that when you go to Acadia or Smart Geometry these days, or AAG, there's a lot of brilliant work that's presented, but a lot of it is academic. And I'm not trying to downplay the importance of it, but what I am trying to emphasize is that work isn't tangible to the professional today. Right? The work that some of these folks are doing, which is, again, brilliant work, is probably like 5 years out until it becomes something that someone can go back to their office and use, right? So if you are this young firm trying to, upskill yourself or your staff, 5 years is a little too long, right? But if you think about AEC Tech, everyone that presents is a professional. There hasn't been much academic presentations being done. And a lot of the work that they're showing is work that they have done for projects, or they have built applications for projects. And you can go back to your desk, the next day, log in, download them, and start to play with them, sort of thing, right? Going back to the Smart Geometry comment. My first smart geometry event was like 2008 back in Munich. And in order to go, you had to submit a 1-page abstract of the project you were going to work on. So it's not like you go and register for a class and you take a class. It was the opposite. You go and say, this is the thing that I want to work on. And a lot of us were professionals, and we took projects that we were working on at work. Whether it's you wanted to take that project you worked on at work and advance it forward, or you wanted to take an opportunity to tangent off of it and do an exploration, right? So you had that opportunity. So once everyone submitted these 1-page abstracts of what they wanted to work on, the cluster leaders then kind of sorted all the attendees into groups, of similarities. One group was automation, one group was simulation, one group was optimization, and so on and so forth. So everyone in the room was working on similar topics, but separate projects. And again, it was all professionals, and you were there for 4 days. You're really immersed in it. And then every evening, during dinner time, one of the cluster leaders would basically gather some imagery and some work from some of the attendees, and they would show it to everyone, right? Kind of like, hey, this is what's working on. So I guess you can kind of think of that as like a curated hackathon in a way, right? You're not building software, but you're there, like long nights, early mornings sort of thing, and just like doing stuff and working on things, right? So I think those two models where it's like more professional focused gives the person more tangibility of like actually executing something when they go back to their office after one of these events.
And that sort of brings us neatly onto a little bit more about AecTech. So you have a AecTech event coming up in October. Can you tell us a little bit about AecTech, how it came about, and what's coming up in October?
Sure. Yeah, AecTech is, again, it's one of my favorite because I've been going to it since it started, since before I was even, part of TT. It was a lot of professionals coming together, showing their work, and it's something that resonated because you can, again, like I said, take it back with you, or take that knowledge back with you to the office. And it started because a lot of these other events started becoming a little too academic. And there's a lot of PhD papers that were being presented, and again, it's kind of like a little far out there, and you can't necessarily use it directly on your projects. So I remember the first year it was just a symposium. I think it was like a 1-day symposium or something like that. And then the next year they added workshops, and I think they added a hackathon at that. And that was my first hackathon that I attended. I was kind of skeptical because I knew how to code, but you know what you know, and there's just so much more you don't know. And, I was like, oh, I'm too shy, I'm not good enough, whatever. And I said, screw it, and I'm going to join the hackathon. So I did, and joined up with a group, and end up winning, I think, second place or something like that. Our group won second place. And then the year after that, again, same hesitation. I was like, I don't know, I'm not really good at this stuff. I kind of do it and kind of hack my way through it. And I joined another group, and we came in first place. And I was like, all right, maybe I'm actually half decent at this, right? Who knows?
So you're hooked now.
Yeah. I mean, needless to say, I've never won ever again. But I am hooked, and you meet everyone that attends these events, the AecTech event, they're all professionals. So you get people from like HOK and Foster's and Gensler and Grimshaw and all sorts of other walks of life, right? We everywhere from the West Coast all the way as far as Japan, right? There's a number of folks that attend, and it's exciting because everyone's there for the same reason, and you finally start to realize that you're not the weird one at your company. There's other ones that are other individuals like yourself. So yeah, you're not alone in life.
So that event's is it the 17th of October, I think?
October 16 through 19, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Starts on the Friday.
Yeah, and where can people go to find out more? It's AecTech.
If you go to aectech.us, and then you can go and click on the agenda and kind of see the setup. Friday is a series of workshops, right, that people can sign up for. Everything from, Python coding in Dynamo to running Rhino app server to some Lunchbox machine learning work with Nate Miller and those folks. Introduction to building 3D models on the web, with 3JS. Rhino inside. Rhino has done some really amazing work in the last few years. I mean, they've always done amazing work. It's just yet another level. There's a Ladybug workshop if you're interested in the sustainability side of things. So there's quite a bit going on that Friday. And then Friday evening is what we call the lightning round. And that's when folks kind of start pitching ideas about the hackathon. Like, what would you want to work on? What is kind of oh, I wish I could do this. Or, we've all been at our desk and said, man, I wish Rhino could do this, or I wish Revit could do that, or I wish ArchiCAD could do this, or I wish Navisworks could do that, right? Those wishes, this is where we start to just throw them up on a whiteboard. Just start throwing all out of left field, see what comes out. And then the groups sort of start to naturally form based on people's interests.
Yeah.
And the hackathon kicks off Saturday and Sunday, and Sunday afternoon is presentation.
Yeah, and it's an amazing setting as well because, when you have that question, I wish this could happen or whatever, when you're in that big group, there's probably somebody who knows the answer or part of the answer, or, whereas if you're just sitting by yourself at your desk, the answer may be so elusive. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the more frustrating things about being in this kind of computational world is that, at least when I started, years ago, it wasn't really being taught in school. There were no books, there were no publications, there was very little material out there. So you really had to kind of find it yourself, or you grab a drink with some of your friends and kind of exchange notes. Now there are communities that revolve around it. You can find communities on Meetup. You can find communities through, Dynamo user groups or Rhino user groups, or events like the AecTech event, or kind of what you and John are doing, with the Hive platform, reaching out to all these different organizations and groups of people and trying to really kind of tie it all together. You're not alone. You don't have to butt your head against the wall. Somebody has tried to do something similar, and you can talk to them.
The other area where the three of us have crossed paths is John was doing some work with us on using Flux a couple of years ago, and you were part of the Flux team at that time.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose an interesting question is about innovations and good ideas and how some of those can become commercial products. And of course, TNT have spun off a number of companies, if you like, or businesses out of innovations that you've worked on, which is it's also an interesting idea and model that ideas can become something that grow legs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Commercial ventures. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're all firms that are trying to build buildings, right? Not one firm does it like the other, but the end result is, vertical walls and horizontal floors, and we use the same gypsum and same concrete, right? We specify the same glass and everything, right? So we are building buildings, and the problem that you are trying to tackle, someone else has also kind of tried to tackle it as well. So these solutions can, once you see viability within the firm, right, which is a great, incubation ground, right? You can iterate and have these micro failures, right? You can think about then rolling this out publicly. The proving ground, they have their Lunchbox tools, right? They have their Slingshot tools that, send data back and forth to databases. TT is no different. We have our TT toolbox, which is up there. And then we've launched a few applications. About 3 years ago, just before I joined, TT launched 4 product. And I'm going to use the word product slightly vaguely. One of them is Construe, which is what I run these days. Another one was Pumpkin mounts, is these isolation mounts. They're used for precious cargo. Another one is, it's a replacement for mass tuned dampers. It's like a quarter of the size and a fraction of the cost. Probably going to get scolded for not remembering the name of this one. And then there's another one, a fourth company called, it's called OnScale now. And basically it was an FEA application that was developed by TT, and it's spun out, and now it's actually grown quite a bit, and there were quite a few firms, large firms, that have invested in it. And they're even using this application for simulating 5G networks. So it's really interesting how like something that you develop for FEA analysis is now applicable in other industries, right? So not only are we in our industry kind of thinking about similar problems and trying to solve them, but there are other industries that have similar problems yet yield different results, right?
And that's fascinating. I mean, most people wouldn't think of architecture and engineering and construction and software development in the same space. You know, it's like two different worlds, if you like. But this merging of architecture, engineering, construction, and the physical environment, and these tools now, and the emergence of prop tech and con tech, and is really interesting in the last few years of how architects and engineers are bringing value, if you like, to the software world in that sort of way of thinking to the development of tools.
Yeah, I mean, anytime that you've sat at your desk and you've done things more than once, that's a moment where you need to step back and say, how can I make this better? Because if you're going to keep doing it the same way, it's kind of the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Like, if you want a different result, you have to do it differently.
I mean, that's always driven me. My background's in architecture, but I can't stand doing mundane and tedious tasks. It drives me nuts. So I'm always looking for a better way of doing something.
Yeah, it's therapeutic for the first 2 minutes, and then after that, it's mind-numbing.
Yeah, and John, you started in the world of architecture when you were studying, but you fully into software development. Well, what's your view of this merging of the AEC and the software development worlds, and what's coming out of that convergence, if you like? I mean, it's obvious that software development is bringing value to AEC when it works. Is AEC bringing value to software development?
That's a good question.
Yeah, the analytical thinking that architects and engineers sort of use in their practice and the way they do things, I think could bring value to.
The long and short of it was that when I was in university, I always wanted to design an algorithm which would design a building. I felt that the schema for a building could be developed from the brief that we were given in university, and that I should just be able to press a button and it would generate this building. And when I realized that, when I got into scripting and Grasshopper, etc., I quickly realized that there was huge computational limitations to do with geometry kernels, etc., and just the rate of processing. It just made it completely unfeasible to do what I actually wanted to do. So then I started building, with my first startup, I started building a collaboration platform for contractors. And in our research into that, I really started to look more closely at this idea of how can we use generative design to automate part of the processes that the architect or that the contractors might use on site. And that brought me into this world of web development. What I realized when I got into web development was that computers could scale, and that was my moment where I was like, okay, the biggest problem for me when with actually running Grasshopper scripts was it was running on in a single thread of one computer. And when I thought, hold on a minute, my problem here is, I was slightly naive at the time. My problem was that I could only use one computer with software that would run data centers like Kubernetes, let's say, which is a container scheduling piece of software for data centers. It essentially automates the deployment and running and pretty much takes care of your application running on data centers. I thought, okay, this is the future and this is where we need to be. From pretty much that day, I said, look, I'm done with desktop software. And this was about 5 years ago now, so I haven't even thought about building software for a desktop or an architect or an engineer over the last 5 years. And to your point about if software is bringing value to AEC, is AEC bringing value to software? I would say yes, but particularly the C is bringing value to software. And for me, I think that looking back at patterns that have happened in the industry over the last few years, like the demise of Flux. Now, Flux was an incredible piece of software. It was before its time. It was really, really cost effective for architects and engineers to get on board with, but they couldn't build a commercial model around the software, and thus they had to pivot, and the great platform that was Flux essentially disappeared to our industry. So I don't know whether that's enough proof in the pudding that architecture and engineering isn't bringing enough value to software. Maybe Charlie, you might have another opinion on that, or Ralph, you too?
I'm writing down your one quote, the great platform that was Flux.
The title of the podcast.
Totally, man. I think we could have another podcast around that one. Is software bringing value to our AEC? I'd say yes, and that's a short answer. Remove a computer from the office and tell people to build buildings today, and everything comes to a pretty screeching halt. Now, to answer the other question, is architecture bringing value to software? I want to say yes, and my rationale for that is we now have the ear of software companies. Before, it used to be like, oh, here's a new version, here are the new features, go ahead and use it. And what we've done, which is what we're really good in AEC, is we've complained. We've complained, and they've put out newer features, and they're all pretty crappy. So then we complained some more, and we're, as architects, kind of peek under the hood and started learning how to use these APIs and SDKs. And then, applications started being built, from small ones to big ones and so on and so forth. And some of these software companies are like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should keep an eye on this company, or maybe we should keep an eye on that company and that company. And the next thing you know, over some period of time, they get acquired. There was a company a few years ago that got acquired by Trimble. They were a daylighting simulation tool. Autodesk has acquired a few other companies over the years. I mean, they've acquired Navisworks many years ago and acquired Assemble not too long ago, and so on. The McNeil folks, they listen to us when we have requests. Like, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that. And some of their latest improvements, the Rhino Inside and Rhino Compute, comes from a lot of requests that people in our industry have made. Like, I want to run multiple, instances of this and do a batch compute sort of thing. And I want to be able to, run Rhino commands within, a third-party application, like Excel or Revit or whatever, right? And you can now these days, right? So I think, the answer is is AEC bringing value to software? I think yes, it is.
There's probably a very small percentage of architects or engineers that are sort of dabbling in that space of APIs and SDKs and, Dynamo, Grasshopper, all these things. Would you say like the vast majority are not sort of entering into that space? What's your feeling? Is it something you teach at university to architects, to engineers? Well, I know you probably do, but that's a very particular course.
Yeah, it's a very particular course, and it's definitely something that so far I've never taught it as a required course. It was always kind of like an elective, which means universities still haven't made this like a part of their kind of required curriculum. But the fact that it's being taught means that, like, hey, we have interest in this. And there's various universities that are like, because there's been a few universities that have changed kind of their leadership, and the leadership is now changing the direction of the universities, because we're just, digital is here, and it's not going away, right? So might as well embrace it. And I think if you compare the digital with reality, as opposed to the blobitecture phase where things just couldn't be built, like if you pair it with reality, then it makes sense. You can still be exploratory, right? But there's a thing called gravity that we need to think about.
Anyway, we've come up to the hour. Is there anything else you want to tell the community? Any words of wisdom to finish off?
Oh man, words of wisdom. I was hoping that you guys would.
Or encouragement.
Words of encouragement. Learning new things is not challenging. It may seem challenging, but it's not. And if you want to learn something new, write yourself a small, tangible to-do list. On my refrigerator, I usually have a small to-do list. And that to-do list will be there for like maybe a year or two. These like tasks that I want to do, whether it's for my career, for work, my personal life. And it's just a reminder, like, hey, I wanted to explore this new technique in photography. Let me spend, 10 minutes thinking about that a little bit. And YouTube is a wealth of resources these days. It's a huge leap compared to when YouTube first came out back in the early 2000s. Like, if you want to learn, Grasshopper, I'm sure there's 100 awesome YouTube videos that will show you how to, like, learn it. If you want to learn Revit, same thing. If you want to learn, C#, same thing, right? Or Python or JavaScript, whatever, right? So if you want to get your foot in the door, there are resources. And then when you get more serious about it, there are other resources that you may want to take a class or go to a conference or a workshop or something, right? So don't think it's like a huge leap or huge investment. It's something that you can do.
Okay. John, any parting words from yourself?
Yeah, I just wanted to extend really on Charlie's advice there to anyone that is thinking about, upskilling in the world of digital technologies in AEC. And my number one would be, or my 2 points would be, the first would be to learn smart. So I've spent, I think, about 3 years learning Node.js on my own through various different resources online. And looking back on that, I wish I had just gone to 3 months of code school to get me to accelerate me to kind of about the year mark. Second thing is be prepared to fail and fail often. It's extremely challenging, and you need to be hugely resilient and persistent in your learning. So yeah, that's my only 2 points that I'd have to add to Charlie. And obviously I'd like to thank Charlie and for coming on and sharing his words of wisdom with us. And good luck with the AecTech event. It's happening next month, and we'll be following along closely with AecHive.
Thanks, John. And from my side as well, Charlie, it was excellent to have this discussion with you. Thanks for all the insights that you've given to the community on what innovation means, and and presumably it's like both of you talked about the learning process, but at the end of that, it's rewarding as well. I would imagine, to create, even if it's a small tool or small process that helps you and makes life a little bit easier, that must be quite rewarding. So thanks for your time, Charlie, and the same, I wish TT Core with great success with their business and with your upcoming event as well. And we must talk again, maybe doing another podcast on talking about Flux. It seems like that's a discussion that needs to needs to take place in the future. So thanks for your time, Charlie.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was an absolute pleasure. Definitely.